Big View, is this a cock-up or a crisis?
I think this is a crisis that has been a long time brewing, Alistair. The potential conflict between a European Convention on Human Rights and the English tradition of parliamentary sovereignty and of the common law. These two things are ultimately not compatible. And I can remember 15 years ago going to a lawyers' conference. I was the only non-lawyer there, God spare me. And I heard 2 or 3 very distinguished barristers saying, the moment will come at some point when these two concepts, European law and English common law, are going to come into insoluble conflict. And I think that moment has arrived.
And in that moment arriving, because we've had the trickle of people coming across the channel for ages now, by bringing it to a head with the Rwanda policy, is that basically a political stunt?
No, I don't think it is a political stunt. I think it is a genuine attempt to solve what has proved so far to be an insoluble problem, to repeat myself.
Yeah.
And when I hear Keir Starmer, and I'm not making a political point here, when I hear Keir Starmer in your clip saying Boris should be doing something completely different, which includes trying to reach a resolution with the French, you want to tear your hair out. Not only have we tried for years to reach a resolution with the French, we've actually paid them 50 million quid to do better. And all this has failed. And the plain fact of the matter is, none of the political parties have a solution. The Rwanda idea might work. It might work. And if it does, we will be very pleased that it puts the traffickers, who are criminals making a fortune, out of work.
We both know, having worked together over many, many years, even going back as far as Maastricht and before that, that the ECHR is the break point. We left the European Union, but we didn't leave the European Council. Now Priti Patel, in the Telegraph, has put meat on the bone. She wants out. Does that risk damaging our reputation abroad?
Yeah, it does risk damaging our reputation abroad. And you only have to hear former Remainers commenting and criticizing this move as being a denial of Winston Churchill, who was one of the motivating forces behind the creation of the European Convention on Human Rights back in, when was it, 1950. So it would do damage to our position. But the problem is not so much the European Convention on Human Rights. And I think Priti Patel is actually advocating throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and I wouldn't support it. The problem is the connecting link between the European Convention and English domestic law,
yes,
as now evinced in the Human Rights Act of 1998. What needs changing is not the convention. It doesn't mean we leave the convention. It means we adjust the Human Rights Act to take account of 2 fundamental things: England's parliamentary sovereignty and the primacy of common law. And without those 2 things, we're going to have these problems time and time again.
Isn't the simple solution, curiously enough, and it's referred to in the manifesto and it's clearly referred to by both the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, that we craft and pass through Parliament a UK Bill of Rights that enshrines all the stuff within the European Convention on Human Rights about protecting the rights of the individual, etc., 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 but we make it a statement of UK law, England and Scotland, with separate judicial systems. Therefore, it is entirely defensible within the UK courts. You still do the right thing, but you police it in a UK way.
Well, that actually is what I'm advocating. I think that is exactly the answer. And successive Conservative party manifestos have promised to bring forward a new Bill of Rights. It looks like one is finally about to appear, and we'll see whether it actually addresses these problems, Alistair. But that is the way to go, because we don't have a written constitution on a single piece of paper, but we have some very strong constitutional principles, and one is the sovereignty of Parliament. The human rights, the European Convention on Human Rights, as it being enacted by the European Court on Human Rights, is now starting to infringe on that sovereign right, as it is also doing to English common law. And the notion that a single member of the European Court of Justice, a single judge, can, of an evening, because he is on duty, issue an interim order, not a definitive order, not a reading of the court, which then stops the Rwandan flight, is absurd. It's ludicrous. And actually, if I'd been a government advisor at the time, I would have said to them, fly the bloody plane anyway, because this is just an interim order. Stick with the English Constitution, stick with the English common law. After all, we'd done due process through our legal system beforehand. The Europeans hadn't.
Final point, and you kind of nodded to it a little bit in that answer, the degree to which it's addressing a very serious, grown-up, profound constitutional point is also being seen by many as being another example of what people are calling wedge policies, the clear blue water that Michael Portillo used to talk about. This is where we stand as Tories, they say. This is where they stand as Labour, they say. And we're different, we're better. A, do you think that's true? And B, do you think that damages the prospects of getting something really important done that does need to be done?
This is a very good point. Of course it's a wedge issue. Of course it is a wedge issue. This is one of these areas where policy and politics are inextricably entangled, and you can't separate the two threads. So I'm sure the Tory party, Boris Johnson, the British government, will hope to play this in a way that does disadvantage the Labour Party and the Lib Dems. But nonetheless, there is an essential, fundamental policy problem to which the Rwanda plan, it sounds a bit desperate and all that, to which the Rwanda plan is an answer. Can you tell me any party, anybody who's come up with a better idea?
Christopher, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for breaking into your Saturday to spend time with us. Best to both of you. Thank you very much indeed. That was Sir Christopher Mayor, former UK ambassador to the United States and indeed to Germany, but also former number 10 press secretary back in the day. Next up, I'm delighted to welcome another friend of mine, Dr. Dennis McShane. Dennis is a former Minister of State for Europe and former Labour Member of Parliament for Rotherham. You know this stuff intimately, having been, as Christopher was an ambassador within Europe, you've been a minister there with your finger on the pulse. Do you think that this Tory government misread or forgot that we remain in the European Council and signatories to the ECHR despite being out of Europe?
Oh, absolutely not. I was the UK delegate to the Council of Europe, minister responsible for it. I can be very boring about the Council of Europe. It was indeed set up, powered through by Winston Churchill in response to what was happening in the 1930s, when British judges upholding English common law kept saying Jews couldn't come from Nazi Germany, maybe a few hundred children, the rest of them go and find asylum somewhere else. And that was the conditions where you now have gays in Iran who will be executed, hung from cranes if they're convicted of being gay, and they escape. And we're now saying we're going to dump them into a Central African country where the human rights rules hardly exist. But I very much I hope I'm a friend of Sir Christopher Mayor. I've enjoyed his hospitality. I really like him. But that wasn't Christopher I knew speaking. That was Linton Crosby, the advisor on wedge issues. And Christopher himself had the honesty to say, yes, let's drive a wedge between, on one hand, future monarch Prince Charles, the Archbishop of Canterbury, lots of liberal, decent people, the people who are taking Ukrainians in, and the people who think that any foreigner arriving in our shores somehow has to be booted out and repudiated. And believe me, the only other two European leaders who are following this policy of leaving the Council of Europe and the European Convention of Human Rights step forward, Vladimir Putin and the president of Belarus, Lukashenko. We really want to become the third pillar of these evil men who hate foreigners, who hate human rights? No, we've got to do it better. Sending people to Rwanda was just a stunt, 100% a stunt before the by-election.
But you know as well as I do that Johnson is not that man. You can criticise him as much as you want, and Patel is not that woman. Now, let me finish my point, and then you come back in again. Because we just ran in our news bulletin Boris Johnson on the tarmac in Kyiv saying, look, don't get muddled over this. We want to protect those who are genuinely in need. And the way, says Patel, of doing that is to get out of the European Convention and have our own Bill of Rights. Where is Labour's answer to that, Dennis?
Well, I'm not in the Labour shadow cabinet or anything like that. You just have to look at all the other countries and democracies of the world, even the United States. Which
Dennis, Dennis, I don't normally interrupt, as you know, but I want to remind folk at home that you wrote a brilliant book, Why Does Labour Keep Losing? And I saw you were doing the literary festival round as well about it too. Here's why Labour is still losing, is because it doesn't come up with a genuine alternative to what the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary bring forward.
Well, I accept that fully, and it's very, very hard. I mean, I would love to say, keep out, welcome white Christian Ukrainians, keep out everybody who's brown or a bit dark. I don't think Boris Johnson, you just have to look at the composition of his cabinet, is in any way racist. I mean, I've known him, not for a nanosecond, but every other country in Europe takes far more per capita share of refugees than we do, and all we think to do is how to dump them into a Central African country, hoping they'll be forgotten. Now, it won't work because the judge in the European Court of Human Rights simply said, heck, can you just wait until you've had your judicial review? You don't need to have to dump all these people now. Wait a few weeks. And Priti Patel brilliantly has turned this into a wedge issue. We'll see if it works for her in the by-elections in Wakefield and Tiverton. And of the view, you can't do this without cooperating. But Mr. Johnson's view of cooperating with President Macron is to say, give us a break, Emmanuel, insult him. And if that's your approach, you won't get very, very far.
Can I put this to you as well, that and you and I have talked about this in the past, that immigration has always been quite an issue for the Labour Party, and I fully accept that you're not in the shadow cabinet and the caveats that you mentioned earlier on. But historically, it's been a problem where there are internationalists within the Labour Party who genuinely believe that open borders, anybody who wants to come here should be able to come here. It's a lovely free world and the rest of it. Then you had the Blairites wanting lots of people coming in because it was cheap labour, that left Gordon Brown, one of the great internationalists, stuck in a corner talking about British jobs for British workers. Labour just haven't got a grip on this.
I fully accept it is incredibly difficult to uphold those values. And believe me, before the war, Labour wasn't that keen on letting Jews into Britain either. It's much easier just to join in the anti-immigrant cries, but it actually doesn't work. If you talk about the Poles and others who are working here, we booted them all out, and now we've got the chronic labour shortages and the economic problems that so many firms work. What you have to do is have what's boringly called a plan based on agreements. And this is actually an international law. It's not a European law. The European Council of Europe has 47 members, got Turkey in it, Georgia, Azerbaijan. Nothing to do with the EU, but it's interesting how you, I think yourself, Alistair, keep calling it a European court, because European is now a bad word in the Tory lexicon. But do I say Labour has got a brilliant problem? My idea would be maybe if we started fewer wars, if we hadn't done Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, we wouldn't have so many people fleeing from the failed state crises that we have helped to bring about. But that's do-goodism, and it wouldn't be nice if this hadn't happened. I fully accept that. No, it's a dog's breakfast for Labour. But I'm not quite sure the British people are entirely ready to say to Prince Charles, the future monarch, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and every senior bishop, you're all a bunch of do-gooding, noodling liberals. Bugger off. We know what we want, and we don't want them people coming down into our streets and messing us around. It is nonsense. They're weak, feebled. Often the poor children actually die sometimes when there's a tragedy. Are always children. We forget about that. And we should process them faster. We should ship them back more decisively. I fully accept that. I mean, I used to deal with many, many asylum seekers. Every MP did, not me personally.
All right.
And the final so big, it lasts forever, and the Home Office and no government's ever got a proper grip on it. But sending them out to the middle of Africa, hoping they'll just run away and come here very fast again. Sorry,
Dennis.
Alistair.
Always a pleasure. Watch the language next time you're on, please. Thank you very much indeed. But seriously, good to talk to you.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.